Hi everyone, Tia from Order of the Bookish here. I'm here with author MJ. She is the author of the True Immortal series, and she's going to be talking about her series, about her writing inspiration, tips and tricks for new authors, and tell us a little bit about her newest upcoming book. I would love to hear more about it.
Hi, thank you for having me, Tia. So starting out, as a general, the whole series. So I actually started publishing about 5 years ago, and it actually came about kind of it's like silver lining type of story where a lot of stuff happened medically with me, where I ended up having suddenly to quit work and not, I was pretty much out on medical disability type of thing for about 8 months. And I was a teacher at the time, and that would have made me not be able to, the whole year would have been gone. So I decided to just sort of leave so they can replace me. And I just always have wanted to be an author. I've always wanted to write. I've been like addicted to the written word since probably I was about 8 or 9. I remember reading my very first like full length book. I got it from my little classroom library, and it was called The Last Book in the Universe. And I got sucked in, and I wouldn't talk to my family. We went on a vacation. I brought the book with me on the car, and I was like, you can't talk to me. I've got to find out. And it just started from there. And so since I was kind of stuck with nothing to do for a long time, I was like, let's do this, and let's see if you can commit yourself and write a book. And it morphed into a 4 book series that are all fairly long. And it's a big sci-fi adventure. It's got a lot of romance, a very strong romance subgenre, because that's a genre that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I like a romance storyline. Um, but I like all genres really. I just prefer if there's something like 2 characters I can root for and that I fall in love with. And so I started that series, and I'm currently writing a couple at the same time. I'm hoping to do about 3 book releases a year coming up. I had one out in July, which was the 5th one in the series of the True Immortals, but this up and coming one that's coming out next month it's a complete shift for me. It's a straight romance book, and the story it hit me in my head and it wouldn't leave, and I just had to write it. So I started it last year, and it's ready now.
Wow, that's so amazing and so exciting. So you've done so much in the past few years, and 3 books a year is not an easy thing to accomplish, but you've been doing it very successfully. You have a full series, and you said 5 books now, and I believe you told me earlier a couple more to come. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's 5 in that series, and then I have the 5th one, I mean the 6th one, sorry. The 6th one is scheduled. It's on track to be ready for roughly a December to January release. I'm just about finished with the main rough draft, which to me means it's been twice gone through before I start thinking, let's get it to the first beta reader. Let's make sure I've hashed it out. And from there, I mean, it's going to be just editing, and then I already have the cover. I've got all that stuff going. So it should be out winter. And then I have the 7th book about halfway done, because I have the 3 books, book 5, 6, and 7 in the series, all have the same scene in them. So for
Really?
my brain works, I had to write a good portion of it. So I would make sure that everybody's character made sense in their story and what you just got like hints of. So I already have that one kind of started. So I mean, it should be coming out next year as well in 2024.
That sounds like a really intense project that requires lots of planning.
And lots of notes.
Yeah. So, you've had a few books out now, so you're pretty experienced as a writer. Are you a plotter or a pantser, and have you always been that way?
Oh, I'm a plotter 100% of the way. And I don't think, I mean, it's in all aspects of my life, I'm a plotter. I guess a funny anecdote off the writing path. When my husband and I were barely about maybe just 2 years married, we'd had this thing where like, let's be like spontaneous. Why can't we be those spontaneous people? Let's just hit the road and go somewhere for the weekend. And then it turned into like with me, like I would say like 25 minutes later, I've got like a draft thing. I'm like, this weekend's not good. Maybe this upcoming weekend I'll book it. We'll know all these things. I'm like, I just can't. I have to have a plan. I
That's
just
so funny. I'm the exact opposite. If I plan it too much, then I end up like either quitting or it just completely goes 180. I'm definitely like like free and I just go with the flow. And at any point in time, I could finish this interview right now and go on a road trip this weekend just for fun. Like I don't like planning. It never works out for me. So I don't bother doing it anyway.
Yeah,
That's so awesome.
I do a long cross country road trip almost every year because I live across the country from my family. We're over 2,000 miles away now. And so pretty much and we have 3 children and they're now under 6 because my oldest just turned 6. So like flying, especially with everything that's happened in the last few years, like it just wasn't something I was willing to jump on.
With
And
kids,
so
you have to plan
we,
too.
we do that off the book. I don't book a hotel because I have no idea if we're going to hit traffic or if kids are going to need bathroom breaks every 4 minutes. So that one I had to adjust and be a little bit that I'll had the seat of my pants.
How funny. I love traveling and I love road trips. What are your favorite places going across the country?
I think my favorite places are like those like off the beaten path, like the rest stops that just randomly have really awesome attractions at them. With young kids, you don't always want to have to be like, oh, I need to be in a restaurant to feed everybody because they're cranky. They've been in a car for 6 hours. They don't want to sit there. They want to run. And I don't really like to be that person with kids that are running all over the place. So I'm like, okay, I need to try to corral them. So we've seen a couple. I couldn't tell you exactly where it is, but it's off the 40 in Texas. And it's got these massive rest stop and it's got a big play structure in it. It's got food options at it. And so we can just pull off there and say, okay, kids, you get we're going to say a whole hour, just go play on the climbing structure. We're going to sit here and relax and on the benches and we're going to recover from the
That's so fun. And like, what a random place to just like enjoy your life, just something off the beaten path.
Yeah, and it's really like you wouldn't think anything of it. There's no big signs or anything at it, but we really enjoy it.
Very cool. Okay, so you're a traveler, you're a writer. You have any more major hobbies? Because those are some major hobbies that you got right there.
I mean, honestly, my hobbies at that point pretty much just break down to spending time with my family, my husband and children. We luckily are like those once he's off work, it's like the weekend is our time and we're trying to knock out all the states, that's traveling. We like camping. And then I do a lot of crafting. I do like homemade Christmas gifts every year. And my oldest is just getting into the point where she'll start working with the Cricut with me and helping design what's going to be the gift this year.
That's very cute. Okay, so you're a crafter, you're a writer, you're a traveler, and you said you were a teacher. Now, I would like to bring this back into books because we got a little off track. I'm a traveler, so I got invested. But do you have any words of wisdom, any teaching tips that you want to give to new and upcoming writers and authors about, the writing process, the publishing process, anything that you learned that, you wish someone had told you before you made the mistake?
Yeah, I think I have a couple. So one of the biggest ones I think I'd have is don't fall for overly confident advice from blogs. Like I had some that were very much like romance will never sell. It's oversaturated. You'll never be found. And so I've actually released the book that's coming out. I did a rough draft into the Kindle Vella platform that Amazon offers for serial writing. It's a lot different from what's currently available on there because I've done a lot more editing. I've added scenes but I just sort of touched the base, and that actually had a very strong response. It was my #1 Vella and still is.
Wow.
It's one of those things I think some people think like the competition for romance books is extreme. I mean, there are so many, but I think there's a reason, and I think it's because people who read romance read a lot of romance. And so just write what you want to write. Don't be too concerned with what other people are going to read because there are people like you out there that are going to love your work. And I had somebody say, I had an author friend tell me, the #1, the worst decision is to write the book you want because nobody will read it. And I mean, that works for her and that's fine. But for me, it's I don't find my writing isn't as passionate if it's not what I would want to read. Mm-hmm. So write what you want to write. And if it's boring to you, it's going to come through and it'll be boring for the reader too. So if a scene's not working for you or the genre doesn't even work, you can scrap it and start over and major edits down the way. It's never don't feel bad about changing and hitting the backspace button, even if it hurts, because you're like, I put 4 months into this. If you're reading it back and you don't love it, it's okay. It's going to get better.
Yeah, editing is probably the most painful part of this whole, from writing to publishing to marketing. I think editing is definitely the most painful part because you put so much investment and soul and love and time into it. And then you realize, or someone tells you, hey, this isn't good, and you have to just nix it out. It hurts.
Is really hard. For the first time I released the book, the very first time, I only had like one person read it beforehand. And I was like, it's good. That's like that. I edited it, you edited it. That's fine, right? It had, I mean, it probably doesn't even resemble the same manuscript anymore. Because at that point I had a friend tell me, like, she's like, I love you, but I think you need to take this back to the drawing board. And at that point, nobody had downloaded it but family and friends. So I purchased an editor, went through the whole process, had professional editing done at all levels, and that was, I think, a steep learning curve, but needs to happen. Like, you do need to learn that your first draft isn't going to be good.
Yeah.
But it will be good. It's just, you need a lot of people's eyes on it. The bigger, at this point now, I have many people who read it before I even think of sending it to an editor.
That's an amazing idea to like get your alpha and your beta readers in there before you send it off to an editor because you're paying so much for an editor. You might as well make it as perfect as you possibly can first and then have the editor look at it. So like once you get your edits back, hopefully, there's not too many white marks on it and you can just keep going with that flow rather than having to go back to the drawing board. I love my alpha and beta readers. Our ARC team has about almost 300 readers on it now, and a lot of them are active beta readers, and they are so incredible at what they do. They help authors, and they really like nitpick down to, character development, plot development, pacing. I had a couple beta readers tell me about my pacing, which, of course hurt my soul because I help authors with their developmental editing, but it's so hard me looking at my own book and being able to edit with fresh eyes. So the beta readers are absolutely incredible.
In my main series that's out, there's like a build up part of like one of the characters, like for like I think it's 2 books build into like what his like backstory is, and he's kind of like that bad boy that you love is his character that he fills. And when I wrote it the first time, it's like I was like, okay, dial it back a little bit. You don't want, like, it's not really a horror, so like don't make it too bad. And then I wrote it and then I sent it out to one of my beta readers who was actually my mom, because she's a huge reader too. And that was like, it hurt because like she actually called me. She's like, it was a big letdown. Like, I was expecting this to be a bigger thing, and then it really just fell flat. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll fix it. But I mean, you need that. You need to have somebody be like, no, this was not, like, I would be upset if I read this as a reader. Like, I'd be like, you built up that this is going to be like this really shocking reveal, and it didn't hit.
Mm-hmm. Go big or go home. You got to do all out.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that your mom's your beta reader. My mom is also my beta reader. She is very critical of all of my writing, which I love and I hate so much. Oh, mom. But that's so cool that your family's so involved and so invested in your work. You have a good support system there.
Yeah, I mean, my mom and my husband, I have spent many hours listening to me like spitball off of them. Like, do you think this is a good thing? Or I'm like, I'm stuck here. Like, why should she forgive him? Or what should be the conflict? I'm kind of, and like, they just have to listen, and they're really good. Like, if I don't take their suggestion, they don't get upset, which is wonderful. I don't feel pressured to be like, well, they want this in the book, so I better put it there. So they're both really like my number 1 and 2 supporters of the book development stage. And then I have a lot of family that they all buy the books, they all read the books. So, and then they like it. I mean, they bought a lot of books of mine and then have then gone off to read other things in this genre that I write in. So I've been like, you must have liked it because now you think that it's good enough to read other books.
Yes, you brought more readers onto our side. We need more readers in the world. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've had kind of a crazy writing journey. You said that you've been writing since you're about 8 years old. Your first series is sci-fi romance, and now you're focused on romance. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing journey from when you were younger to where you are now?
Yeah, so I started out with fantasy. That was the number one big, like kind of like sci-fi and fantasy. That was where I first started. I read a lot of the young adult or the children. So, Charlie Bone, Harry Potter, those really big ones. Like, I mean, pretty much most people know them, at least Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Harry Potter actually was introduced. My mom, when they came out, she got the books, and me and my brother and sister would sit around and she'd read. Like, that was a thing we did like every night, and we'd read them all as a family, which is like one of my most cherished family memories.
That's
And
amazing.
it changes to like, oh, when I got a little bit older, I started reading like, the more romance, but my mom had those blocked for a while because she knows what's in romance books, and she's like, you're too young. But when I was pretty old enough, I started reading like vampire series by Anita Blake is one of them. I'm trying to think. I'm spacing on. It's Anita Blake is the name of the character. I can't remember the author. I feel really bad. I like to put the actual author name out, but I am completely.
I'll tag it below. I'll find it and I'll put it in the caption.
There we go. Yeah, I'm like I haven't. Like they're really good. So she's a vampire hunter who has like necromancer powers, and it was a fantastic series. Read them, and from there it's like then I started reading werewolf, and then I started reading basically anything under the sun. I've read fantasy, fae, westerns, and then I've done historical romances. I've even read some that aren't strictly romance, they're just sort of like historical, like studies like caveman, like where people have changed and made them like. So I can't think of a genre I've never read. Like if it's a world that draws me in, I like to use it as like an escape. Like I read every day. I read late at night and early morning. It's how I start and end my day, to kind of just decompress. So for me, like it made perfect sense to write. I've always had ideas, and I've kind of started and stopped books my whole life. But I was really busy. I took, advanced courses in high school, and then I started doing dual enrollment in high school. So I was doing college at the same time. And then for a while, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I was science oriented. So I was in a lot of high level, like a lot of time commitment in classes in college. So if I started a story, I never finished it. I got pulled out by real life. And when I finally had the time to just sit there, it's like it started something. And I think right now I'm kind of like getting a few things down, like when the story hits and I have to write it because it has to come out. I have like the plot of about 7 different books. Many of them are not even related. They're completely different genres. And they have like, I think I'm sitting at around 10,000 words in most of them, where it's already been drafted. And it's just a needed escape. I need to do it. And so I'm really trying to be forceful with keeping myself like accountable to a story at a time, because it shifted from never having time to finish a book because of real life to, or I'm not finishing a book because I'm like, oh, this new idea is in my head and I have to get it on paper. So I have to take a pause from this and write this. But
Mhm.
I get better at just finish. Like I have like a very detailed schedule of how many words, like, each book should get a week, so that I make sure that they still all stay on track.
That's very cool. Yeah. So you are a scheduler. Do you find, I assume you find having a schedule works for you, but what about those moments when maybe you have a little bit of writer's block? What do you do when you have your schedule, but you don't really have the motivation to write in that moment?
So for me, I think that's where having so many active manuscripts work for me, because like of all of them, there's only 2 that I'm actively writing really consistently right now. And that's just one, because I'm really loving it and I just need to it's a dark romance that I've never really, it's like a mafia romance that is inspired by an author named Mia Knight. I came across hers just randomly about 5, maybe 4 years ago. And I have consumed every book I reread them probably 12, 13 times. And so it was kind of like, I'm like, I have to write one because I love it so much. So that one is like my just of passion. I'm writing that, have to get that one going. But I'm dedicating everything else right now to that 6th book in the True Immortal series. That way that it can, because I mean, I do love that one as much as all the other ones, but it's at that stage where you're saying goodbye to characters because I'm wrapping it up. And that's where my writer's block come in. So what I tend to do is just say, okay, that's going to go back for I call it percolating. I'm going to let it sit. And that's when I write on something else. And then before I reread, sometimes I reread the series now that I have enough books. It's like, okay, if I'm struggling to see how they're going to get out or where they're going to move from here, I tend to just go reread the book for a little while, and then I'll kind of get some ideas or something will spark and be like, oh, I should put that in. Honestly, the biggest issue I have with writer's block is just being too busy. I generally have ideas. I have, like I said, 3 young children, and one's in school, so there's all of the tasks that come along with having all the commitments they have. I mean, I feel like every week has a new thing they need. So it's mostly a time thing. So for me, it's like when I actually get to the computer, I'm so thankful to have time to write it that I'm like, I don't have time for a block.
That's awesome. Yeah, you just push it out of the way and keep going. And even if you're not actually writing, I think it's very cool that at least you're reading. So at least you're in the mindset of, words and creativity and getting your voice out there. And even if you're not actively writing, I consider reading to be research. Like I consider it to be practice. You're kind of looking at your competition, you're looking at what you could be, it's igniting your creativity. So even if you're not actively writing, I always recommend to authors, go read a book, go listen to an author talk about their book. At least put yourself in the space of that, writing zone so that when you are ready to actually start writing, it's easy to pick up from.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool that you have that going for you. So we've talked about the True Immortal series. Now I really want to talk about this new upcoming book that you have that's going to be all romance, right? So not fantasy, not sci-fi, just romance. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so this one is one that has an interesting start to life. So I just was scrolling on, social media, and I came across a writing prompt that was, I don't even remember what page shared it. It was maybe one of those sponsored things. It's like, you don't even know why it's there. And it was just like, oh, the whole take on if we're not married by 30, we have to marry each other. But instead of it being between 2 friends, it's like 2 enemies. And it's like, but the twist is that they're sabotaging, like one really wants to marry the other. So they're actually sabotaging all of their attempts. So that way they can marry them at 30. And I was like, oh, that's such a cute idea. And then I went on and it sparked something. And I just really kept thinking about, I was like, gosh, that would be just, and I kind of looked for a book. I was like, I would actually really like to read that now. And so I looked and I just couldn't quite find anything that was really, I mean, some good books, but nothing that was really what I had envisioned. And so I finally was just like, I'm just going to start jotting down. I don't have time. I'm writing these books. I'm just going to jot down some ideas. And then I think in the course of a weekend, I had over 15,000 words of that. Like, I'm just going to keep going. I might as well, like at this point, I should just get this finished. And so it's kind of an interesting mix for me because it was a lot harder for me to write than I expected, because I actually usually gravitate to enemies to lovers. It's one of my favorites. So
mine too. I love that trope.
Me too. I mean, the trope. All my favorite tropes are in this book. I think it's like a love letter to all of the books that I've ever loved. There's so many little things in there that I'm like, oh, I remember that one. That was a really good like dynamic. And I've spent a lot of time to make sure that it's not like I was copying anything, but it was like, oh, I don't know why, because like I wouldn't like it in real life, but I love reading about like where it's like a miscommunication or like an insult said in like the moment, and then the guy has to really like grovel and fix it. Like, no, you really messed up and you have to fix it now. Like, I don't think I've ever let somebody insult me and then be okay with it. But I really like the writing, the reading part of that, and throwing myself in. Like, I love a book that makes me cry right before everything gets good again. And like Diana Palmer is a book that my mom loved her. And so she had like every book. And so I was one of the first romances I started. And that's a really common reoccurring thing in hers, is like a really gruff man who doesn't know how to express emotion. And then like a really like, wonderful woman. And then, he hurts her and then he has to make it better. And you're like, oh, that's so sweet. And I just really wanted to write one. I was like, I can do it. But I struggled to write. Like, and also like my husband is very sweet and nice and he doesn't do anything like that. I was like, man, this is really hard to actually like, You have to write somebody who's insulting, who you know will be their love interest,
I think
but
it's
not.
a good thing that it was hard to write, that you don't have anyone in your life who could inspire that character. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is good. It'd be worse if I could have written it. And it's like it should be like it has to be shocking and bad, but it can't be that bad because you don't want it to be like where you're like you can't be like a complete horrible person. And
Mm.
so it sparked like a lot of backstory. His name's Trevor Matthews in the book, and he's a photographer who owns his own studio in a small town in Tennessee. And it was like, I had like this idea when I wrote. My plotting stage was, oh, okay, his father abandoned him and his mother. He has abandonment issues. That's where all of the, angst is coming from on his end. And then when I was writing, he had a lot more to say. And it was like his mother was neglectful. She basically would just leave him, with no food, no money from a very young age. And that like built more and more. And he has basically no support system outside of just a friend and the family of that friend. And it became, I had to do a lot of research into realistically, how does somebody come away from that, the scars and the trauma that would give them? And, so one of the things that's helped me personally in my own life is I actually got postpartum depression pretty severely after my firstborn. And I was always somebody who thought that I understood that therapy is important. And then once you actually need it, I think that's what it really brought into your head. Like, no, I don't think I ever really realized how serious it is, and that it is actually really important in a lot of people's lives, and it should be bigger. And so in this book, I actually tried really hard. There's a lot of scenes of his growth as him actually going to a therapist. I tried hard to research as best I could to put some realistic, without being too medically heavy in there, like what would you expect from a character growth who has to unpack all of this and not make it too fast. Because sometimes I think in books you do have it like, oh, they have a moment, they have trouble, now they're better. When really it takes a lot more time in the real
Yeah.
life. So I try to model that and let people who maybe be struggling can at least relate, like, okay, like it took a long time and it's gonna, but you put the time in and you can get better.
That's very cool. So it sounds like this next book that you have coming on is, you did everything very intentionally. Like the characters might have taken on a life of their own a little bit, but you did have really strong control over, I mean, the way it sounds, I haven't read it yet, but it sounds like you have really strong control over what you want them to do and how it's going to reflect, the real world and what your readers can take away from it. And I love that you're writing with the intention of making sure your readers can take something away. So I know you said to write for yourself, but you're also writing for your readers. And I think they're going to be able to connect more with the book because you're doing that intentionally.
Yeah, that's kind of how because that is like with my plan. I always have basically, I rarely will draft out scenes. I more draft out the like points that are going to hit. Like, okay, this is what's going to happen. I mean, it's generally like a rough idea, but I mean, for me, I've always had the characters be very loud. I mean, and I mean, every book I've written, I've never had one that I've written that have a character who was intended to just be kind of like, oh, I need to get the information. They're the only ones who would know it. So let's put him in this scene and then he'll come a bigger role later. That has screwed me a lot. I have had entire like huge sections of my main series, my first series, like just completely steamrolled by a character who wasn't even supposed to really be in it till book 3. And
Yeah, the characters kind of write themselves, and there's not much you could do about it as the author, ironically.
you
So,
think you can, but sometimes no.
oh yeah, no. I have characters like that too. Thank you so much for joining us today for this interview, for telling us about your life and your hobbies and your amazing story. I'm really looking forward to reading this next book of yours. This is MJ, author of the True Immortal series, with a lot more amazing books coming out soon. And I am Tia from Order of the Bookish. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and happy reading. Bye, everyone.
Bye.